Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Lockdown Library with me, Asim Qureshi. I have with me today, I'm very honored to say, Postcolonial Banter by Suhaima Manzoor Khan. This is probably, actually, it was my favorite book of 2019. It's a short collection of Suhaima's poetry that she's been reciting and writing, especially over the last 2 or 3 years. Some of you may be familiar. In fact, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Suhaima's work. She really came to popularity in the public eye and imagination in 2017, around the summertime, when she took part in a roundhouse competition. It was a poetry competition where she recited a poem called "This Is Not a Humanizing Poem," which really, subhanAllah, I think anybody who watched it at the time really felt like it struck so deeply at the core of how they feel about being a Muslim in the UK, the kind of expectations that are placed on us. And since that time, I've actually had the privilege of being able to get to know her better, not only just for her poetry, but also because of the academic work that she does. But further than that, she takes that work as an activist and really tries to affect change. So she's not just writing about what she sees in the world. She's not just critiquing the world. What you'll find throughout all of her work, if you follow her closely, is that there is always this element of actually trying to change things with her hands, to really affect the change that she wants to see in the world. So that's why I have a great deal of time for her work, because it's work that's not just based in theory. There is a huge element of what scholars call praxis, so an actual lived attempt at building resistance rather than just simply talking about it. And I think maybe the two things that, for me, typify Suhaima's contribution is really, first of all, something that happened last year in 2019. She was invited to take part at the Bradford Literature Festival. And on hearing that they were taking money from a pot that was part of the larger Prevent fund, Suhaima not only pulled out, but actually helped to organize an alternative event to the Bradford Literature Festival, like an alternative event. And that really struck me, because one of the things that we were hearing about a number of people who participated, despite knowing the problematic funding that the festival was receiving, was that they felt that them being given a platform was more important than the harm that was being caused by Prevent to the Muslim community itself. Whereas Suhaima understands that actually the theoretical work that she's doing, the work that she's doing critiquing the state, critiquing the world that she sees, if she doesn't live by those same values, if she doesn't exemplify what it means to resist those structures, then a lot of it's meaningless. And I think in that we find somebody who really does practice what she preaches. More recently, just over this whole coronavirus incident, we saw her tweeting a great deal from Pakistan, where she was stuck alongside hundreds and hundreds of other Pakistanis. And I think one of the fascinating things about me watching that her organizing all of these groups that were being left behind by the British government was that at any moment she could have easily have funded her own way out. She has a great deal of following online. It would have been the simplest thing in the world for her to put out a tweet saying, "Look, guys, I'm stuck here. I need help getting back to the UK. Can people please help me to get back?" But what was very clear was that there were many other people who were in worse medical conditions than she was and than her family were, and that they needed help, and that it would be, in her mind, unconscionable for her to try and use that public position that she has in order to come home when so many others were in difficulty. And again, it's something that I know that I'm not really talking about the book so much right now just yet. I will get onto it in a second, but I wanted to kind of give you a feeling for why this collection is important because I feel that the person who who wrote it is such a great example of what it means to practice what you preach. So the collection is called Postcolonial Banter. I'll put it up for you again. It's got a very interesting front cover. Um, but there isn't really much that's banterish about the collection. This is a very serious collection. It really strikes at the heart of so many of the issues that we see within the public imagination, especially the way that we as Muslims experience racism every day of our lives. So even the titles of her poetry, which are probably the things that are most banterish about the whole thing. So, for example, one of the titles is called Straddling the Line. You'll know if it's for you. Um, it hits hard because right from the off, right from the very title, you know that there's a serious message that's coming. And a poem like that, it really gets you reflect not only on what the poem is saying, but really about you and the role that you play in society and the role that and the ways in which we might perpetuate the very wrongs that she's highlighting. A great deal of the poetry will make people feel uncomfortable. It will make them question a lot about themselves. Um, I think, especially for those who come from outside of uh, the Muslim community, I think they will, in particular, be challenged by much of the poetry. She's got one poem called "Pick One" for the woman who asked, "Muslim, feminist, or human?" Like, of course, that's a distinction that should ever be made. Um, but she's asked these questions all the time because people think that it's okay to ask these questions without being called out on it. And here she is. She's saying, okay, fine, you're asking these questions of me, but let me explain to you why the very question itself is so problematic. And it's interesting that she's also not writing for them at the same time. So it's a weird thing that Sahema's responding to to this world. She's critiquing the people who are asking these inane questions. But at the same time, she's not writing for them. She's very much writing for herself. So for example, she has one poem literally called "This Poem Is Not For You," because her poetry is an act of truth speaking. It's about really holding systems and structures of power to account, and for those, especially those who live extremely privileged lives, for them to reflect on the fact that they walk through this earth with a certain ease, but also a certain blindness that they're not aware of. And she's highlighting where those blind spots actually are. But in that poem, she says, "And if it is for you, then at least let me tell you, don't you dare fight away someplace. Don't you dare blink nod it into the race straw, or scrunch eye it into the colonialism cupboard. Don't token applaud it into the feminism lever arch. I can see you doing it now. This poem is beyond you." This isn't just about ranting or raving. This isn't like a screed that's being kind of shouted into an abyss. So much of the poetry comes from a place of deep and genuine love for her community, love for her family, love of Allah, and it's really remarkable when you start going through, especially some of the more personal and intimate poems, that you really feel that sense of wanting to carry everyone with her. There is a really amazing poem that's called Paki, where she helps her own brother who uses it four times, this word in front of her, this slur in front of her, in a way that, sometimes people who have experienced racism will internalize the language of that racism without realizing how it might necessarily be problematic. But what she says is, about her brother, "I lead him into the kitchen, cut out our tongues, and sew them back together in new shapes, relearning the language of our grandmother." There's something so stunning and beautiful about her describing this as a joint activity. She's not reprimanding her brother. She's not telling him simply, don't say these words. It's a case of, okay, together, let's rethink about the language that we're using. Let's sew our tongues back together. Just the imagery of that is so stunning and so compelling. Again, one of the things that I really love about this collection is the spirituality and the connectedness to Allah that features heavily. You know, throughout the whole collection, I think almost in every single poem, you'll be able to hear the echoes that her Muslimness is not simply a culture and identity that she wears, but really it is connected to her faith, her genuine appreciation for everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given her and her place in you know in the universe in relation to worship of Him. And there's a really lovely two lines that she writes. She says, if all the oceans were ink, they would run dry before the words of my Creator did." Just such a an amazing couple of lines that really capture how her poetry is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's majesty and Him as the ultimate creator. So even the art of the pen, of the poetry, and everything is placed within the context of a much larger cosmic plan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for all of us. Of course, I'm going to be a bit biased here and say that, you know, her writing about her cycling to, you know, what is my favorite mosque in the whole of London, which is Lewisham Mosque, on Ramadan nights, in a poem that's called A Poem That Winds Through the Streets of Lewisham. It really actually captures perfectly, you know, how so many of us feel about attending that mosque. Even though I'm not a local to it, whenever I'm invited there by the imams to, you know, kind of participate in lectures or even in meetings, you really feel a sense of the community spirit that they have there. But ultimately, you know, like I've said before, this collection of poetry is really an act of genuine truth speaking, of really wonderful truth speaking. And you get such a strong feeling from that, just if you just read the titles and nothing else. I mean, one of her titles literally is School inspectors in England have been told to start asking young girls in primary school why they are wearing a hijab in order to ascertain if they are being sexualized. I mean, you can tell immediately from the title that something's about to happen here. And that's not where this title is going to end. There's going to be a poem that comes on the other side of this that really holds, you know, school inspectors, Ofsted, the government to account for the way in which they reduce Muslim women to a debate and discussion that doesn't ever include them in the way that they should be perceived. You know, and it's the reason why when I saw the Roundhouse poem, it was, I think, within a couple of days of me having finished the first draft of my own book, A Virtue of Disobedience. And I just remember watching the poem and thinking to myself, you know, this young sister has summarized in a 3-minute poem everything that, you know, I was trying to say in a whole book. And it's actually one of the reasons why I asked Shahima to write a poem to begin my book, and it's actually included near the back of the collection within the book itself. It's called A Virtue of Disobedience after the title of my book. But also, you know, she has so much to say in such clever ways as well that she's also been kind enough to write an essay for our forthcoming book. Same as Yasser Morsi from the previous essay, from the previous episode, called I Refuse to Condemn Resisting Racism in Times of National Security. And in that essay, she really focuses so brilliantly on everything that's happened after This Is Not a Humanizing Poem, you know, became so popular, and the ways in which that despite all the important things that she has to say, she's constantly being tokenized. So people aren't listening to the message at times. What they're doing is they're just seeing a Muslim woman in hijab and thinking, okay, that's enough. right? Regardless of what her message is, even if the platform fundamentally is the thing that she's critiquing, they're not seeing, they're not hearing the message. They're just looking at the image, and in that is a tokenization, which she's highlighting as being particularly problematic. So I think, subhanAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the sister for all of her work and everything that she's doing. She's somebody that I admire a great deal for, following her work closely. I really get a sense of how connected, all of the different strands of her thinking are, whether it's the political, whether it's the religious, but they all seamlessly come together in actual activity. This isn't just theoretical. Mashallah, the sister is doing, um, acts of truth speaking that are helping to bring about change. And for that, I think this book definitely should be on everybody's bookshelves. So again, I look forward to hearing from you and your thoughts about Suhaima's poetry. I do encourage you to buy the book, and inshallah, I will hopefully see you again soon. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.